Who would have imagined that, after the absolute disaster in China, Ferrari would achieve the unthinkable at Suzuka? How did the Italian team go from being the laughingstock of the paddock to once again sparking excitement after just one qualifying lap? Today I'm going to tell you the story behind Ferrari's rebirth at the 2025 Japanese GP, a story that blends precision engineering, desperate decisions, and a dose of wounded pride. Because what they did at Suzuka was no coincidence, and if you stay until the end, you'll understand why this could be the spark that lights the fire in Maranello this year. And before we dive in, leave me a comment. Do you think this performance was just a fleeting spark or the true start of Ferrari's counterattack in 2025? Let's analyze it in detail. What happened at the 2025 Chinese Grand Prix wasn't simply a bad result for Ferrari. It was an open wound, a public humiliation that struck at the pride and credibility of the most iconic team in the history of Formula One. For the first time since the championship's existence, both Scuderia cars were disqualified from a race at the same event. An unprecedented event that not only reflects a technical error, but a systemic failure within the Maranello structure. The context couldn't have been more contradictory. Lewis Hamilton, a recent arrival at Ferrari, had surprised the entire paddock by taking pole position for the sprint and taking a resounding victory in that same short race. It was a glimmer of hope that ignited enthusiasm among the fans. It seemed that, finally, the SF25 had found its way. But that hope was short-lived. At the end of the main race, the FIA began its routine technical checks. It was then that the details that would change everything were revealed. Hamilton's car showed excessive wear on the skid plate, the famous plank, located at the base of the car. This component, designed to ensure the car doesn't run too low to the ground, was outside the legal limits. The regulations are clear. The plate must maintain a minimum thickness of 9 millimeters. In the case of the number 44 Ferrari, measurements indicated between 8.5 and 8.6 millimeters. There was no room for interpretation. It was a direct violation and therefore an automatic disqualification. But the nightmare didn't end there. Charles Leclerc's car was found to be underweight, weighing just 1 kilogram below the regulatory minimum of 900 kilograms. It was missing just 1 kilogram. How could something like this happen? According to the team itself, the error was due to a last-minute strategic change that reduced the planned pit stops from 2 to 1. This adjustment didn't adequately consider fuel consumption or the car's total load. A failure in race management that ultimately cost them dearly. For team principal Fred Vasseur, this was more than just a technical error. He called it a calamitous weekend, not in a press conference, but in his internal communications with the team, where the frustration was evident. Not just because of the technical failure, but because of what it meant symbolically. Ferrari, with all its legacy, was failing at the most basic level. The minimum height, the weight of the car. Two aspects that mid-table teams manage with millimetric precision, and which Ferrari, with all its infrastructure and talent, had been unable to control. And this is where the real turning point comes. Because beyond the anger and embarrassment, the disqualification in China forced Ferrari to face its own reality. Excuses or justifications were no longer enough. It was time for a profound self-criticism. The team understood that it was losing not only points, but something more valuable: credibility. What happened in China wasn't an anecdote. It was a wake-up call. The kind of mistake that, in a season where the margins are razor-thin, can destroy any championship ambitions. But it was also a starting point. Because from that moment on, Ferrari decided it couldn't afford to repeat something like that. Emergency meetings began in Maranello, with engineers and management evaluating every decision made. Every procedure was reviewed, from simulations to set up protocols between the sprint and the race. Because the real problem, as it later turned out, wasn't just one of execution, but a lack of critical information. Especially with Hamilton, whose dry simulation data was incomplete due to a technical glitch during pre-season testing. This meant Ferrari entered the weekend in China with limited information on how their car performed under long race conditions. In other words, they were flying blind. Literally. This accumulation of errors led to an inescapable conclusion. Ferrari could no longer improvise. Either they radically transformed their technical and operational approach, or 2025 would be over in just a few weeks. And so, after the greatest technical humiliation in decades, a new determination was born within the team. Because sometimes, to rebuild, you have to hit rock bottom first. And that's exactly what happened in Shanghai. An absolute disaster turned into an opportunity. While the world of Formula One was shaken by the double disqualification scandal in China, something very different was beginning to brew inside Maranello, a quiet revolution. Ferrari understood from the very first moment after that disaster that apologies or taking responsibility weren't enough. They needed concrete answers, immediate solutions. And to do so, they launched an internal operation that, although kept out of the spotlight, could have been one of the most meticulous maneuvers the Scuderia has executed in recent years. The first thing the technical team did was dismantle, piece by piece, every element that had failed in China, from the suspension height to fuel management. But what was truly revealing was what happened in the Ferrari simulator. Instead of focusing on a complete redesign of the car, as other struggling teams have done in the past, the engineers decided to pursue a more surgical strategy, perfecting the SF25 down to the last millimeter. Not changing it but understanding it thoroughly. In total, nearly 20 different configurations were tested, focusing especially on technical circuits like Suzuka, where the margin of error is minimal and precision is everything. Each of these virtual scenarios focused on a clear objective: finding the car's perfect operating window. That magical zone in which the SF25 becomes a competitive machine, where aerodynamics, mechanics, and balance work in sync. One of the great revelations of these tests was the car's extreme sensitivity to changes in height relative to the ground. Literally, variations of just a few millimeters could cause a dramatic loss of downforce, affecting cornering and the car's overall stability. It wasn't a conceptual flaw. It was a matter of fine-tuning. This sensitivity, which in theory could be a weakness, became a key clue to understanding why the car only shined in specific sessions, such as on Fridays or during sprints, but disappeared in the race. Another finding was the poor interaction between the rear aerodynamics and the suspension system. The airflow that should have been efficiently channeled to the diffuser wasn't being fully utilized. This caused the car to lose grip when exiting fast corners, affecting traction and increasing tire wear. Inconsistencies were also detected in the car's mechanical response, making it almost impossible to maintain consistent performance throughout the race. And this is where the key point comes in. Unlike previous seasons where Ferrari has tended to resort to drastic solutions or hasty redesigns, this time there was maturity. There was patience. The engineers understood that they didn't need to invent a new car, but rather to extract the best from what they already had. And that understanding marked the beginning of a paradigm shift within the team. It wasn't just a technical change. It was also an operational restructuring. Roles within the engineering team were reorganized. Feedback between drivers and track engineers was prioritized. Collaboration between the simulation, aerodynamics, and strategy departments was strengthened. Each department of Ferrari was held accountable not for what it projected on paper, but for what translated into concrete results. The result of this process was a car that arrived at Suzuka with an optimized, precise setup based on real data, not assumptions. An SF25 much better suited to the technical nature of the Japanese circuit, which was finally able to showcase its potential without compromising the legality or control of its fundamental parameters. The gap was no longer abysmal. According to internal analyses, Ferrari reduced the gap with McLaren to just 0.3 per lap. And most importantly, for the first time this season, they knew exactly why they were getting it. This silent technical revolution didn't have any big announcements or spectacular press conferences. But it was, without a doubt, the true foundation of Ferrari's resurrection in Japan. Because in Formula One, success isn't always born from the visible. Sometimes, it's brewing in the shadows, in the endless early mornings in the simulator, in the technical reports that no one reads aloud. And when that work bears fruit on the track, that's when everyone turns their attention to Maranello again. And then came Suzuka, an unforgiving track. A technical snake full of interlocking curves, where the car must not only be fast but perfectly balanced. And it was there, precisely on one of the most demanding circuits on the calendar, that Ferrari showed a completely different side. A side we hadn't seen for some time. It was in Japan that the SF25 ceased to be an erratic mystery and transformed into a tool finely tuned to the limit. All the technical work carried out after the debacle in China began to show signs of life in a clear, visible, almost surgical way. During free practice, something was noticeable from the very beginning. Lewis Hamilton, who had just been the subject of a media storm following his disqualification, placed fourth in the FP2 times. But it wasn't just the position that caught the eye, but the way it was done. The Briton was especially competitive in the first sector, a section known as the Snake, where fast corners follow one another, demanding instant chassis response and exceptionally balanced downforce. It's a section where most cars suffer from instability, but not the Ferrari. And there was the sign. The SF25, which until a few days ago had been unpredictable and untamable, was now stable, solid, and precise. Hamilton could attack the corners without fear of the car becoming unbalanced at the slightest bump. Charles Leclerc, meanwhile, also demonstrated a significant step forward in feel and control, something that had been a recurring problem for him in previous races. Suzuka was the first circuit where both drivers agreed on one thing: the car was finally responding. The most impressive result, however, came during qualifying. Ferrari managed to place one of its cars in a pole position that, while not pole, represented a perfect lap. A lap where every inch of the track was exploited, where the SF25 was agile in the turns, strong under braking, and competitive on the straights without compromising stability. That lap was the true symbol that something had changed. And it wasn't luck or external conditions. It was a pure reflection of judicious engineering work. But what does this really mean? In terms of the championship, there's still a mountain to climb. Ferrari still trails McLaren by more than 60 points. However, what was seen at Suzuka goes far beyond the numbers. What it means is that the perceived distance between Ferrari and the championship leaders isn't structural. It's not an insurmountable technical gap. It's a gap that can be closed, and now they know it for sure. Furthermore, this result has an immediate impact on team morale. After the psychological blow of the double disqualification in China, what happened in Japan served as a safety valve and a catalyst. The drivers regained confidence. The engineers validated their methodology. The technical staff, led by Vasseur, finally found concrete arguments to look their rivals in the eye and say, "We're back." Another element that cannot be overlooked is the media impact. Ferrari, after weeks of being the target of criticism, is once again in the spotlight for the right reasons. And this, in a sport where perception and pressure play a huge role, can have significant consequences for how strategic and technical decisions evolve from now on. From sponsors to the paddock environment, the respect that is regained with a performance like this is pure gold. But there's also a caveat. This kind of performance can't be isolated. It can't continue to be a brilliant performance without continuity. Ferrari's challenge now is to replicate this performance, to adapt what they learned at Suzuka to circuits with different characteristics, to demonstrate that the SF25 works not only on technical tracks, but also on power circuits, in extreme climates, on chaotic weekends. Because only then can a true comeback be built. What happened in Japan doesn't guarantee titles or victories, but it does change the tone of the conversation. Now, Ferrari isn't just a team under reconstruction. It's a potential contender, a serious player, a sleeping giant that, after falling into the abyss, seems to have found its way back to the top. And if they can maintain this momentum, what we saw at Suzuka could be remembered as the exact point where it all began, where Ferrari stopped surviving and started fighting. Today we've taken a detailed look at Ferrari's technical, strategic, and emotional rebirth at the 2025 Japanese Grand Prix. A story that began with a resounding fall in China, where the Scuderia hit rock bottom both sportingly and institutionally, and which found a turning point in Suzuka that few expected but many desired. Because what Ferrari has achieved isn't just a fast lap or a good qualifying session. It's a vindication. It's confirmation that this team, despite its setbacks, still has the knowledge, talent, and structure to compete with the best in the world. We've seen how a double disqualification, far from sinking them, became the driving force behind a profound transformation. It wasn't a motivational speech that turned things around. It was a work of analysis, simulation, millimetric adjustments, and technical self-criticism. It was the ability to acknowledge mistakes and turn them into opportunities for improvement. Ferrari has shown that when it takes its own failings seriously, it can reverse them with a speed that surprises even its detractors. And the most interesting thing is that what we witnessed at Suzuka doesn't appear to be a one-off flash in the pan. It's not the typical brilliant performance followed by 2 weekends of confusion. No, this time there's substance. There's data. There's a foundation. The improved suspension, the detailed understanding of aerodynamic behavior, the use of the simulator with more than 20 different configurations. Everything indicates that Ferrari has found the root of its problems and is now operating with a technical clarity it hasn't shown for some time. But the most valuable thing about all this is that, finally, the narrative has changed. Ferrari is no longer just the team that should be at the top. Now it's the team that's beginning to show it can be at the top. The difference is abysmal. It's the transition from promise to execution, from frustration to respect. And while there's still a long way to go this season, what happened in Japan could be remembered as the moment Ferrari stopped improvising and started building. So now it's your turn. Do you think this improvement is sustainable? Do you think Ferrari can compete fully in the fight with McLaren and Red Bull for the remainder of the championship? Or are we facing another fleeting illusion that will be dispelled at the next race? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if this analysis helped you see things more clearly, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications.